So I'll start. Cloud Foundry is an application framework. And so you develop your application and whatever your favorite application development platform is, and then you use Cloud Foundry you do a CF push, you push it out, you deploy it, you can monitor it, you can manage it, you can scale it, you can restart it, you can kill it. So it's the framework that lets you deploy your application and manage it, so the application developer doesn't have to worry about the runtime part. And so to start out with why Cloud Foundry, I actually wanted to start out with my personal story about why I'm on Cloud Foundry. I started out in open source software because I think we can create much better things in the world if we all collaborate together. So I think it was in college, we'd sit there and we'd have 100 people in the classroom and we'd all go write the same spell checker. And I was like, this is really silly, like why am I writing a spell checker and the guy next to me is writing a spell checker and the guy next to him is writing a spell checker. So to me the idea of open source where we could all collaborate and build on each other's ideas and make things even bigger was super appealing, and that's why I went into it. I mean, many of you may know my real first start in open source software was with GNOME. How many people are familiar with GNOME in the room? Awesome. And our goal was to have a free and open source software desktop. And at one point I was executive director of GNOME, and I said, we have a free and open source software desktop. And I started talking about the fact that the web wasn't open, and like we were storing all of our data in these data stores that we didn't have, they weren't open formats, you couldn't easily pull your stuff out, you couldn't move them from one photo management tool to the other photo management tool. And so I ended up at Mozilla. And at Mozilla, we were working on making sure that the web was open for everybody and that there were open formats and open standards. This is a group in Namibia, I think I have the country right, and they're working on Firefox OS phones. Because a lot of the phones that are going into developing countries aren't open, they aren't open. So they're channeling the web like through Facebook or through another platform. And so we're working on making sure that the next generation or the next billion people in developing countries had access to the entire web and had that freedom to create. And so then I saw like there's this new thing coming up, and it's really exciting, and it's a little bit crazy still, I think, and there's a lot of work to be done there, and that's the cloud. I think the way things are going now, if you're an individual app developer, you really can't create an app that just runs on the laptop. I mean, there's a few that still work though, there's a few on the desktop, but most apps that are most meaningful in our world today run on the cloud, are available 24/7, scale, they're reliable. And so this cloud space needs to be open, it needs to be standard, and we need to make sure that application developers everywhere can use it, or we're gonna miss a whole lot of people and a whole lot of great ideas. So how many people remember the year of the desktop slogan?
Which year?
2001, do you remember that one? And then it was the year of the desktop in 2007, and then it was the year of the desktop in 2010, and I think I saw something written late last year that it's now the year of the desktop. And we make a lot of fun of that, but I actually think we miss, by making so much fun of the year of the desktop, we miss some really key innovations that came out of all that effort. So for example, one laptop per child. They were built on Linux and open source software. They said they were going to bring a laptop to every kid in the world for $100. And they didn't exactly accomplish their mission, but I think along the way, they really influenced the whole netbook market. So all the netbooks that were created went way down in price. They actually came down to $100. So they changed, the Linux desktop changed the world. That's just one example. Another example is the Raspberry Pis were also built off the Linux desktop model. So now you can get like a $35 little gadget that you can turn into a desktop, or you can turn into like a monitoring system for your house, or you can. So there were a lot of innovations along the way that we missed by saying it wasn't the year of the Linux desktop. And so this new thing that's coming, this new run it in the cloud, I think it's really huge. It's going to be the next wave. It's going to be something like electricity or something, it's going to be an innovation that means that much to our society, maybe like the internet. So it's the year of the cloud, but not like the year of the cloud. And we've all heard the word cloud for about 5 years now, and probably we'll hear it for another 5 or 10. But it's really the time that we're starting to see a lot of people work together. And it's both individuals and companies. So the Cloud Foundry Foundation, I'm missing a few logos, but we have 53 companies, most of who are users, not actually developers. They're not making money off Cloud Foundry directly, like they're not selling it. They're actually using it in their businesses, and they want to be part of this open source movement. So I think this is a time we can bring individuals and companies together in a way that's reminiscent of probably the Linux kernel and when Linux actually got started. And at the same time, probably the Linux kernel felt this way too, but the cloud space and Cloud Foundry is kind of really big for individual minds to conceive and to know all the pieces and parts. And so it's our job, those of us that are good at that or those of us that want to use it, to make sure that all the pieces work really well together. For example, all the software has to work well together and it has to be scalable. So this is a picture of Oktoberfest in Munich. Who wants to guess how many beers they serve during that weekend? How many?
More than 1 billion.
You're close with 1 billion, but not quite that much beer. Any other guesses? How much beer?
What's attendance?
That's a really good question. Multiply by 10 after that. So it's 8 million beers in that weekend get served there. And so they've learned how to scale their beer pouring and their beer serving to 8 million. It also has to be really reliable, has to be up 24/7. So developers should be able to develop an app and deploy it without having to have a team of 20 people to keep their app up and running 24/7. There should be some service or some way that we can enable individuals to create. And it has to be able to be monitored. And then all those pieces have to fit together. So when you take all those pieces, the ones that schedule it, the ones that deploy it across VMs, the ones that monitor it, the ones that can kill it and start it, they all have to be kludged together. And I'll get into it in a little bit, but companies often end up with like teams of 20 people to do that work. And we want to make sure it's accessible to everybody. So what Cloud Foundry does is take all those things that you would need to deploy an app, the thing to deploy it, the thing to monitor it, the thing to schedule it, the thing to scale it up. It's Christmas time and your app refers people to Amazon for your affiliate fees, should be able to immediately scale to the size it needs and to eventually kill it if you need to. And what we're seeing is both individuals and companies are seeing really huge exponential changes. So this is SAP Tech Ed, I was there, and they had these real examples of how much people had saved or how much faster they could scale their app. And these are real customers that have their names on the bottom. And I see this across the industry when I go to the vendors that sell Cloud Foundry are touting this stuff. But our vision is that there should be a cloud platform that can be either private, you should be able to deploy your own Cloud Foundry platform and run your own app, or there should be public instances of Cloud Foundry you can deploy your app, and you should be able to move your app between them. So we don't want to create a monopoly where one person is the only place where you can deploy your app. We want to make sure that a lot of people can live in this ecosystem, and that there's a vibrant ecosystem of apps that can move between vendors, and various vendors that offer different services at different levels for different things. And just as a couple of examples, anyone heard of Comic Relief? It's a really big nonprofit in the UK. They do a number of good works things. The one I always remember is they help babies in Africa, and they have really heart-rending stories. They do all their fundraising in one day, and it's called the Red Nose Day. Don't ask me why. And that day, the public television service helps them advertise across all the UK, and everyone makes their donations, and they bring in $1 billion that day. And they're doing about 400 transactions a second. But they do all this during 7-hour periods. The rest of the 364 days a year, they don't raise much money at all. And then during the 7-hour window, they have to bring in $1 billion. And they really can't miss any part of that window, or they just missed 1/7 of their fundraising thing. And a small development team of about 5 people from a company called Arkumi used Cloud Foundry and set up their platform. And so they run on Cloud Foundry for they run all year round, but during this one day they managed to scale from a few transactions a second to 400. Another example is GE. They're bringing all of this technology to the industrial internet. So they're building big wind farms, airplanes, and all these airplanes have tons of data. So they're reporting back, the wind farms report back from different parts of each windmill, report back every second or a couple times a second, and they take all that data and they're able to make decisions about where the airplane flies, or what the wind speed is, or what the gas mileage is, or what the wind farm's working on in real time with all of this data, and it has to scale depending on what's happening in the moment. And so how does Cloud Foundry fit in here? Since the year 2000, 52% of the Fortune 500 companies have dropped off the list. And I heard an even more startling number. It was since 1980, 80% of them are different. So companies haven't learned how to ramp up, become number one in their business, and stay there. And so one of the things that they're missing right now, this is a book by Rita Gunther McGrath, it's actually a good read. She says it used to be, up until probably 2000, what companies did was discover their niche. They developed, they dominated their niche. I pick on HP because I worked at HP. So HP was like the printer company. And they did printers better than anybody else, and they dominated the market. And if you wanted a printer, you bought HP, and that was just obvious. And they could kind of ride that wave, because if you're going to buy a printer, you're going to buy HP's printer. That's no longer the case. Now you have a customer, and that customer is loyal to you as long as you adapt to their needs. So take a guess. How many times a day does Amazon adjust their prices? How many times, across all their platform, how many?
10.
Way more than 10 times. They adjust their prices 2.5 million times a day. Yeah, across all their products, they're constantly adjusting their prices, fluctuating by what they're seeing in the market, what people are asking, what the providers are doing, what they're adding. They're also at the same time updating, I've never managed to see one, but they're updating their carts or their buttons or their look and feel. From one day to the next, you can kind of see some changes in Amazon. So they're constantly adjusting to their customers. So they're not staying in one market, they're dominating all markets, but they're constantly adjusting to keep those customers. And so that continuous innovation cycle is what most companies and most businesses are going to need to adopt, that ability to constantly know what their customers want next and to be able to change with it. And that's going to require some culture changes. So you're no longer going to have great big teams, a lab of 100 people working on, picking on HP, but HPOX. You're going to have small teams. The guess is you probably need a team that, I'm getting ahead of myself, but you need a team that 2 pizzas can feed. And those teams need to be able to work really quickly and communicate effectively with other teams without having to spend a lot of time in meetings discussing what my product does and what yours does and how they're going to interface. So it's a continuous integration. How many people have some kind of integration place at your work or your project where all of you can check in code in the same place? Probably most of you. Awesome. And how many people have a continuous deployment? So when you check in code, it actually goes to market to your website or to your product within, say, a month, within a week, within a day. Okay, the rest of you are stuck in water scrumfall. So you have this very agile development cycle, but it's not able to be released quickly because of whatever QA testing or release process you have. And so it kind of looks like this. You develop something really cool and nobody can see it, or you can't see what you need to see. And so we want to help people get to this continuous integration, continuous deployment is kind of the area we're focused on, and so that they can have continuous innovation and keep up with the market and keep up with their customers. Another way to think about it is how many people used to work at an organization that had kind of software was broken up into front office, back office, and you had very clear roles, and you actually sat probably in different buildings or different teams. This is a PricewaterhouseCoopers diagram, by the way. And then you move to kind of the enterprise service bus, where there is a little less, a little more interaction, a little more definition about what you are and how you interact with other people. And then we move to this new model of APIs, where you shouldn't have to have a meeting with the group whose APIs you're using. They should say, here's what I do, here's my API, and then your application can call it with a very well-defined, here's how I call it, here's what I can expect back, and then you can fail gracefully or move on to the next thing if it doesn't work. So getting back to the 2-pizza team idea, this is Melvin Conway, and he said that any product will look like its organization. So however you set up your teams, your product will end up looking like this. This kind of gives me nightmares at times in certain places I've worked, because however you set up your organization, your product is going to mirror that in some way. Those are the people that talk together, those are the people that work together. And so here's the 2-pizza team. And I want to point out, if Caleb is on your team, you probably only have a 2-person team because he wants his whole pizza to himself. I think it was somebody at Amazon that coined that idea. And so we used to have, maybe I'm kind of saying the same thing over and over again, but it's a really important culture change and a really important change to get why we're doing what we're doing at Cloud Foundry. And I'm going to give you a demo and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But you used to have an application world where you probably had a technical architect or a chief technical architect who knew how everything worked. And everybody in the organization was a little afraid they might leave and then you wouldn't know how something worked. Now you've moved to a world where everyone manages their own application or their own microservice, and they interact with other people through APIs. And so no one really knows how all the pieces work, but they all work well together because there's clear definition of what they do and how they interact. How many people feel like they're in the monolithic layered world these days? Cool. A lot of us still are. And how many people feel like they're at least transitioning to microservices or trying to make that leap? Awesome. And so if anyone wants to chime in, feel free if you have questions or you have stories you want to share. I'm down here instead of up there, so we can try to do that. So microservices, this new world is great. And actually, to be honest with you, I feel like microservices is like, it's the great new thing. Like now we're not supposed to eat flour. It's better than what we had, but I don't think it's the end-all be-all. So I think we're still evolving just like diets are evolving. But they're great. But you need to make sure that you can rapidly provision them, that you can create them very quickly, that you can deploy them quickly, that you can update them in place without messing with anything else around. You need to make sure you can scale them quickly, and you need to make sure you have a culture that works really well with them. And so if you ask anybody about this microservices, when I started in this area, they all point you to 12factor.net. They say that's the holy grail, the Bible that will tell you how to do microservices. I think it's a really awesome primer. I don't think it's going to teach you how to do microservices by itself. Because there's a whole bunch more things. I'm not going to read through these. But you also need to make sure that there's not much, if you create microservices, you need to make sure that what the developers are developing is actually what's getting deployed, that those environments look very similar. You need to make sure you can scale up really quickly. So in addition to just creating this thing called a microservice, you have to make sure that the environment around it also works well with microservices, and that's kind of the whole DevOps culture that they talk about. How many people have a group in their company that's called DevOps? I'm just kind of curious. Yeah? And how many people would consider themselves a DevOps person? Cool. You too? But even though that's not enough, you still need to know how you're going to recover from failures. You need to be able to isolate the resources. You need to be able to figure out how you're going to deal with data, because these microservices don't carry their own data with them, so they have to have persistent data somewhere. So there's a lot of issues to be figured out. And a lot of technologies, so the Borg was Google's cluster configuration software, and a lot of really cool technologies spun out of that or around that time and around that space. And that's what we're seeing people play with now. So we're seeing people play with Kubernetes, with Mesos, with Docker. I heard the Docker talk here was like you couldn't get into it. So these are the technologies that as people move to microservices, they're trying for. And I wanted to include this slide because I think it's really cool. How many people here are open source fans? We're at scale, hopefully everybody. So if you look at this, we now have open source all the way from the hardware stack all the way up to the software stack. So the whole stack has open source software. But there's another change here that I think is really cool. And the other change is these are not company names these are project names. So now instead of having technologies focused around companies, we have technologies focused around projects all the way up the stack. And I think that's pretty new. We've been working on it for a long time, but that ability is pretty new. And we've also changed the way we measure things. You can see how the world's changed by looking at the unit measurements. So we've changed from internet as a service to platform as a service, or to the app platform. And so we've gone from measuring things and how many VMs do you have to having how many microservices or apps do you have with their whole world in it. And you don't have to worry about the number of VMs. The application platform should spin those up automatically and send your app where it needs to go. And the reason that these application platforms can make it is because they can do this is because they have constraints. But because they have constraints, they can make promises. So because they say you have to use one of these 50 languages, they can say, if you're using one of these 50 languages, we can handle the build for you. So they have constraints so that they can make promises. And then they can make promises like this is one of the Cloud Foundry developers, and he said, he wrote a haiku. I'm pretty impressed. He said, here's my source code. Run it on the cloud for me. I do not care how. Just make the thing work. And so what we're trying to do is turn that environment from the left where you had to have all your libraries, your dependencies, your zip files, your jar files, and turn it into something where you just have your app with a load balancer and a database thing, and all you have to worry about is your app. And the platform should automatically, self-deploy, figure out what build environment you're on, push it out there, scale it, add more instances when it needs to, kill it when you tell it to. And so this is CF push is when you ask how you do Cloud Foundry, everyone says CF push, like that's the command you run the most. So CF, and there's a whole bunch of variables you can add to it and stuff, but you do CF target, my Cloud Foundry, I'm going to give you a demo in a sec. I just wanted to walk you through what I'm going to demo you through. So you're going to do CF target, so you're going to say, here's my Cloud Foundry environment. I'm using IBM Bluemix, or I'm using Pivotal, or I'm using the one I set up on my servers. That's my target environment where I want to run my app. Then you do a CF push your app, which is literally just the files that are part of your application. And then you can create services, so if your application needs a database, you need persistent data store, you create a service. Then you bind your app to the service so that they know to work with each other and talk to each other. And then you start your app. And if you want, you can scale it, or you can set it up to automatically scale. And so what's the container? So a lot of people get confused between Cloud Foundry and Docker and Kubernetes, how do all those pieces work together? There are containers in Cloud Foundry, but what we've done is say, so what teams have done is they go and play with all these technologies, and they put them together, and what they find, and they're learning in the process, they learn about containers, they learn about schedulers, and then they end up with a team of 20 people keeping those things running well together. And so what we've done is taken the best of those, given you as many choices as we can, and packages them all up and do that for you. So it's a prescriptive environment instead of a self-assembled environment, so that you're not trying to put them together like that. And okay, for you really literal folks, this is not a one-to-one mapping, so schedulers, not core services. I'm just trying to show a little bit what's under the covers here. So Garden is the container management. There's build packs that have all the information about, they can figure out if you're using Python or Go or Ruby and put your application together. Diego pushes your apps across VMs. GoRouter does a lot of the communication stuff. And what I wanted to show here is that there's these technologies on the right that we're playing with, other people are playing with, and I'm going to take Docker here as the example. So a while ago, you may have heard that Docker and a bunch of other organizations got together and created a standard called runc. So when they did that, we took our container technology Garden and said, okay, now there's a standard there. We'll make sure that all of our users, you can't see it, but the runc logo is in there. All of our users also have access to the standard. So you can use Docker containers in Cloud Foundry, or any container that uses that standard format. And this is basically what a container is. So a container is a set of isolation rules. So it has a process ID, a user, a network ID, and then it also has a file system, and a set of, what we take in the file system and a set of processes, and we call that a droplet in Cloud Foundry. And so that droplet is your application. So it's enough of the operating system, the application, and the files that it runs on create that droplet, and that's what get managed. And so containers are awesome, but they're just really not enough, because you need a platform to run your container on, and even if you don't think you have a platform, you have a platform. So how many people have a platform that makes them feel like that? or makes some team in your organization feel like that? You do. And so this is a CF push that I talked about earlier. And so these are all the things that happen when you do a CF push. And this is how they're bigger than just containers. So when you do a CF push, it creates your app, it uploads all the app files, it stores all the metadata, it stages the app, it creates that droplet that I talked about. I won't walk you through all that. I'm going to show you. I should have showed you first and then talked about it. And then I want to talk a little bit about build packs. So build packs, so when you create your application for Cloud Foundry in any language you like, and I say any language, and I mean just about any language. Someone told me we have a Cobalt build pack. And then, yes, that we take those, when you do CF push, we load all the build packs, and the build packs actually have 3 scripts to them. They try to detect what language it is. I just forgot the second one. Then they build the application and then they execute it. So each build pack knows how to do that. So they all run the detect, if you don't tell it what language you're using, each build pack will check your application and try to detect if that's a language it should be involved in. So the Python build pack will say, is this a Python file? Okay, then run me. And it'll put together all your dependencies. If it needs to be compiled, if it's a language that needs to be compiled, it will compile it with your dependencies. If it's not a language, if it's like Python, it just takes the files it needs with the dependencies. Oh, those were the three. So it detects, am I supposed to run? It builds the thing if it needs building, and then it passes on the data to Cloud Foundry to be deployed on a virtual machine. And it's kind of the same thing with services. So services, if you wanted to add a database to Cloud Foundry, like a database service, you didn't want to use one, but you wanted to create one, you would create a manifest file that just says, it tells it, I think there's 5 files, it tells it, it adds catalog information, so it's like, I'm a database if someone wants to use me. It tells Cloud Foundry how to provision it if someone calls it. So how would I provision MySQL if it was that? It tells Cloud Foundry how to bind it. So if someone needs that database, how do they connect it to the app that it's using? And then it tells it how to unbind it and how to kill it so that it can easily be scaled, put in or removed from the running process. And so this is all part of turning all of those mess of files that you have to worry about into one where you only worry about your app. So I'm going to do the demo. And I don't like live demos, so I apologize. I actually, here it's running. So I'm just showing the directory that it's in, and I did this for real on my laptop. So you can see I have a Python app, Hello Pi. I showed you what's in it. So the only dependency is Flask. And then I show you the requirements file here. You can see I have, the only requirement is Flask. And then I'm doing my CF push. I limited the memory, I don't know why, because this is like a Hello World app. And I called it Demo for You. And so it's creating the app. It's binding to the interface where I have set up to push. This was Pivotal's Cloud Foundry at the moment. It uploaded my files. And then it's going to start my app and look for the build pack. So it's creating a container to put it. Now it's downloading all the build packs, because I didn't tell it I was using Python. So it's going to download all the build packs and try to figure out for me what language I used. I didn't upgrade that. And so you can see it figured out that I needed the Python build pack, and it installed the Python runtime. And then it's creating this droplet for me, which has my application, the operating system, and the files for me, just for my app. And then it uploaded it. And now, for some reason, when I ran it this time, it took a couple tries to get my instance running. It's only a Hello World app, so I'm not quite sure what happens there. And so it started my app, and then it tells me that it's running. It's not using any memory yet. And then I always do a CF apps, because then it gives you a URL. And my Hello World app is actually live on the web as soon as I've done that. So I'm going to Firefox. I put that URL in, and you can see my Hello World app. Any of you could do this. You can set up a trial account in like 5 minutes, and you can get this done with, you can download any demo app from the. And so now I said, it's Christmas time. I'm sure everyone's going to use my Hello World app, so I'm going to scale it up. I want 8 versions of it. So I did the scale with the -I for 8 instances. And you can see if you start refreshing, there's actually 8 instances of my Hello World app. So if everybody wanted to check it out, I could scale up to the root. And so when I did this URL was live. Then I said, what if we add a database? So I created a service, ClearDB database, and I made some error there. So I'm going to do it again. So I'm just creating a service, and I just tell it what database service I want, and I tell it when I want it to be called, and it creates the database in a second. And there's lots of databases already built into Cloud Foundry, so you could use any of them. And databases are often used for persistent data because your application itself doesn't store any data. And then I'm binding that database that I created to my app. So I'm saying bind my app to that demo DB is what I called my database. And I didn't actually do the restage here, I think. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to turn on this get environment variable just so I can show you that the database is actually live. My very complicated demo here. And you can cheat. If you just want to try this out, you can write your own demo, or there's a whole bunch on GitHub. If you just Google Cloud Foundry demo, you can download somebody else's demo and play with it. And so then I do another CF push because I've added another service. And it redeploys my app for me updates it in place. So it stops it and it starts it. I create now here's where, if I know I'm just using Python, I probably should have just told it I was using Python, because now I have to download all the build packs again. In this case, it's only a few seconds. Any questions? What?
Where do you get the CF executable that you're using?
You can, yeah, you can download the command line interface to your laptop, and then you do a CF to, sorry, on the spot, forgetting you tell it which server you're using, so which Cloud Foundry instance you're using. Cloud Foundry won't actually install on your laptop, and we've tried, and you can get it to work on your laptop, but it's kind of big for a laptop environment. So if you're just demoing it as an app developer, you can see I have a whole bunch of instances running now, and again, there's the URL that's my actual live app. And if we go back there, you can see that we added all the database instance there. So you can run Cloud Foundry on your laptop. It's a little difficult. You can install Cloud Foundry on a server in your environment and then tell your Cloud Foundry command line interface to work with that one. Or you could sign up for a trial from like SAP or IBM or Pivotal and just use theirs.
Could I deploy to like AWS or another service, or
Could you deploy to AWS? Yeah, so Cloud Foundry works on AWS, OpenStack, a number of different infrastructure platforms. Any other questions on this? Yeah.
Do you get deterministic builds out of this? Does everybody starting with the same source code, does everybody get the same binary?
You never see your binaries.
Yeah, but could you verify that the binary running is exactly the same for anybody doing the build?
I think so, but I can verify that for you. What's the case that you're worried about?
Just to know that we started with this source code, the binary that's running is
Oh, it's a security.
what we know it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it doesn't matter who builds it, they all get the same output.
Yeah, typically you would build it and then you would be providing this URL as a service to somebody else. So typically you wouldn't be providing your Cloud Foundry app to others and expecting them to run it in their environment. You would be hosting your own app for them. But
if we build it one day and it's
yes,
running,
making
and we
sure
rebuild it a month later, is it the exact same thing?
I think so from some conversations I've had, but I'm not 100% sure, so I will definitely follow up with you.
Certainly the way,
Yeah.
and then it runs pip install, right? And so pip install is vulnerable to the internet changing out there, right? That's going to go and find the latest version of such and such library and throw it in your application. So Flask releases in between deploy 1 and deploy 2, you'll be running a different version.
Okay, so
You could specify the versions.
Yeah, so you can lock it all down in requirements like TXT if you want to.
And like GCC, if you're running on different times, you will produce very different binaries. You don't, and that's just a compiler issue. So deterministic build
a tough problem.
Very, 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 very difficult.
I can put you in touch with someone, or I can just find the answer and tell you. Do you use Cloud Foundry?
Yeah, but I run Python a lot.
Okay. Nobody here, I usually recruit all the Cloud Foundry users and make them sit in the front row and help me answer all my questions. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so I work at a public cloud, and we'd probably not be running it ourselves, but helping users deploy for themselves. Do you have any? Could you talk about or point me in the right direction for information about deploying Cloud Foundry itself as opposed to deploying apps?
Yes. If you go to cloudfoundry.org/docs, there's lots of information there. And then we have a mailing list called cf-dev. And there's a Slack channel, slack.cloudfoundry.org. All those places. The documentation should all be there. If you run into holes, please file bug requests. And then there's the mailing list and the Slack have really active people that can help answer those questions. Yeah. I'm curious, how many people would see themselves using their own instance of Cloud Foundry in their company, like installing it themselves on their own cloud environment or in their own company? So a couple of you, cool. And how many of you would see your company, contracting with Pivotal or IBM or SAP or Swisscom, both? Yeah. So that's fine.
I work at CenturyLink, so we
Okay.
have Cloud Foundry already.
Yep.
Public cloud, but we want it for private cloud too.
Cool,
So that's why I'm here to learn about it.
cool, yeah.
Is Cloud Foundry, I'm not sure how to phrase this question, but is it like really for enterprise use? Or what about like if I have an individual website? Would you find, like, is it a good use case to use Cloud Foundry for that, or what would you recommend?
It's a good use case for both individuals and companies. Companies are really, right now, I would say our most visible users are companies who are seeing these tremendous changes. Like they have this real problem that they need to update their prices 2.5 million times a day or something, and Cloud Foundry helps them scale to that level, and they replace 20-person teams with Cloud Foundry or more. But I think the technology is now also super useful to individuals, especially individuals who couldn't have a 20-person team can now deploy an app that's available 24/7, scales, restarts itself when it fails. Like that potential wasn't available to individuals before. So that's why I'm here at Scale. Like I think there's a huge message out there, right? That application, that we want to empower those individual application developers as well. Any other questions? Anybody have anything to add? Yeah.
I'm the newbie, so maybe the question is very naive. Does AWS provide similar product to Cloud Foundry or is it
So AWS provides a lot of services, and it provides a lot of the internet as a service services. Cloud Foundry provides the platform as a service, so the application management thing. So it offers a lot more assistance to you in managing your app and making sure it's up and redeploying it and creating the VMs for you. So you actually put Cloud Foundry on top of AWS, for example. And if you want to add to that, anyone can add to that too.
Quick question, maybe I'm also another movie, but when you say the application scales up and then you have various databases underlying supporting the application, so the database also scales up or only the app response scales up?
The database does this too, does as well too.
So app instances also scale up and database instances also scale up.
It's not quite that simple because you want like one copy of your data, but they also scale. Yeah, you.
So, in that, when you had this picture of the left and the right side, if I have a bunch of virtual machines, because I have a tenant on an OpenStack cloud, and I wanted to deploy Cloud Foundry such that, people who work for me or with me could deploy applications. How much infrastructure do you burn on that left side? Like how many, what is the actual, does that all get located on a single node, or is there 15 of them? What's the overhead of just running Cloud Foundry before the work gets done?
So it can all run on a single node.
Probably not how we do it, but.
Yeah, probably not. So you don't need like a whole bunch of machines to run Cloud Foundry, if that's what you're saying. Like it can run a single node.
Because it looks a little intimidating. It's a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, and that's why I think that's the power, right? Like once we can explain to people the promise that it makes, like you don't have to figure out all those pieces. Like you probably still need to understand how they work because that's the kind of job we're in, but you don't have to make sure they all work well together anymore. But you can run it on a single server and it'll work. How many nodes you add depends on like your redundancy and what your application needs. And
Okay. And then,
you can make it work on a laptop if you really tweak stuff.
so then, when it's becoming more like a build farm than a deployment farm, right? Like, so if you push a GCC, an application in C that needs to be compiled, does it spin up an AWS node and then build on that node and then store the artifact and then deploy to a different node?
So I don't know at that level, like you're asking where it builds versus where it deploys. So it's going to build it within it's going to create a virtual machine and build it there for you. But you don't have to worry about which virtual machine it is. Like if something happens, you're going to say restart my app, not restart my virtual machine.
And when you say scale 8, does that copy or rebuild?
I don't know.
And then one more, sorry.
Yeah.
So,
Can somebody write down my questions for me so I can follow up with people?
yeah.
I can't.
Thanks.
When you're doing these CF, you said you CF push a lot, right? Probably git commit and CF push.
Yeah.
Is it have a sense of storing old ones?
No, no, the old ones are gone.
So the rollbacks going back again.
You would have to rebuild, yeah. Yeah,
Is it all container-based then, or do you have the option of, pushing those parts into a virtual machine?
so it's all app-based. So it has containers, we call them droplets, the container with your app information,
Right.
and they run on virtual machines, but the only part that you interface with is your app, which gets created into a droplet with a container. Does that answer your question?
Well, I guess, so you could run that on multiple virtual machines, and I guess I'm asking basically the same question, footprint, right? So
Yeah, so you're not going to think, like, once you're using it, you're not going to think about it running in various virtual machines. You're going to think about how many instances do you have running. And then Bosch and other parts of Cloud Foundry make sure that it's across different virtual machines or different systems and that it's redundant. Like, you don't have to worry about that. Even though you want to worry about that, but like, yeah.
When you do a CF push, it showed that it was shutting down the old ones. Is there a possibility for doing a rolling upgrade? For example, I want to start this new version alongside my old version and slowly turn down my old versions that are still serving requests and then bring up my new ones at the same time and switch them out of the load balancer?
I don't know. The way I would know how to do it would be create new names, but I don't know if you can do that in runtime. So. Yep.
Is there like a persistent storage facility?
Yes, well, the databases are your persistent storage. So the apps don't have dedicated persistent storage per app, but you store data to the databases. And I think that's a problem that's still being worked out in the space. So there's actively conversations about persistent storage and where should it be, where should it live and how should it work. So if it's a space you're interested in, like, now's the time to join those mailing lists and like participate. Or you can wait and smart minds will figure it out, hopefully.
You mentioned OpenStack, right?
Uh-huh.
And, can you explain a little bit more about how OpenStack works, and if I wanted to deploy like my individual website to OpenStack, do I just go to OpenStack.com? This might be really naive.
So I'm not the OpenStack expert, so Cloud Foundry deploys on top of OpenStack, but I wouldn't be able to answer that question for you.
OpenStack is a virtualization infrastructure, so it allows you to click a button, you get a VM. Whereas this is deploying your application and building it in like global dependencies in a single location. That's not what OpenStack is. So OpenStack, you get a virtual machine, it's like your physical machine, and now you do what you need to do on top of that. Two very different spaces.
And if you do deploy Cloud Foundry and OpenStack, Cloud Foundry is the one that requests those virtual machines. It doesn't, you are now working with your app space, not with the virtual machines from OpenStack. Any other questions or input from anybody? Okay. So I was going to talk, yeah.
So conceptually, if you have, say, 10 spare servers, and you need to set up Cloud Foundry on each of the 10 servers,
No, once in it, you tell it about the 10 servers.
tell about the 10 servers, and then it creates those VMs on those 10 servers?
Yep,
And deploys the apps within that?
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
And then load balances, so if you spin up 8, it'll just move around.
yep.
Interesting.
So those aren't bare servers, you need like an OpenStack server.
Yes, you need OpenStack or something on them as well. So you need the whole stack, and Cloud Foundry is kind of the top layer of the stack. Yes,
Okay, so OpenStack would be what you put on.
yep.
But would Cloud Foundry manage like putting OpenStack on those servers, or do you have to do it?
You would have to install it,
You have to do
yes.
it first, and then.
Yep.
Okay.
Cool.
Error message or something in case the targeted VMs have already enough load that they cannot handle the load of your push.
Yeah, you can set all sorts of different messages to alert it for different things. So yeah. Yes, there's log files and there's messaging. I should probably repeat the questions. Has everybody been able to hear them? I'll start repeating them. All right, so we need a platform. We did a demo. So I think I've said this. So Cloud Foundry is it can make a promise to you because it offers these constraints. But what we want to do is be able to make a promise to the app developers that their app will run, that it'll scale, that it'll be monitored. And that allows us to create this ecosystem of apps that can be moved around, people that can move between services. And what I wanted to point out again here, these are the Cloud Foundry Foundation members. Cloud Foundry Foundation is a nonprofit that hosts the Cloud Foundry project. But there are a lot of companies here that are users. And so I think that's really key. Like, it's a key moment because these are companies that are willing to invest in the open source software that they're using. So these are companies that want to come and they want to have a say in the requirements and they want to help develop it. And so we're getting news articles like this, that these companies are joining the foundation because they need the software and they want to have vendors that provide it for them, but they also want to make sure they don't have vendor lock-in. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we rebalance the system so that the providers can still make money and they can still provide a service, but that we're also making sure that the voice of the user is heard even before they really understand the technology or know how to actually work on it. And so what we're doing is building individual, we're calling them SIGs, which is like a kind of overused word, I think, in this space, but special interest groups for the different vertical platforms. So like, how many people here are in the financial industry? Anybody in the telecom industry? Awesome. What other industries are people in? Healthcare. Nothing they're willing to share, CIA, secret government stuff. The government it's actually really cool. The government's using the US government, the Korean government, the South Korean government, the UK government, all of them are using Cloud Foundry, and they're willing to talk about it. The US government actually created its cloudfoundry.docs.gov, I think. Anyway, they actually have their own documentation site where they documented how they use it and how other US government organizations can use their instance of Cloud Foundry. And so we actually created these SIGs, and this was the very first one we held early last year, in New York City. Nobody told me when I went that you're supposed to, when you go to New York City and you go to Wall Street, you're supposed to wear a button-up blue shirt. So I was not only the only woman in the room, I was the only one not wearing a button-up blue shirt. But it was really interesting. So they all talked about what they're trying to do in the space. They were really open to sharing with each other what they had tried and what was working and not working in a way that I really haven't seen in this kind of industry before. And if you're curious, my favorite example, what in the world do banks need differently than Cloud Foundry than anybody else? They needed much more specific role-based permissions. So someone that can start a service is not the same person that can stop a service in the banking industry due to all the financial regulations. And then another thing that we've done is we're creating dojos. So they're usually hosted by a company, one of the Cloud Foundry Foundation companies. And these dojos are places where you can apply and you come for 6 weeks. So Cloud Foundry uses the pair programming model. How many people have worked in a pair programming type environment or tried it? Okay. So all of our code is pair programmed. Usually the people sit in the same room if they're in the same company, but we've also managed to do it virtually. And so Dojo is a place where you can come for 6 weeks. You're paired up with someone, or maybe several someones, who are more expert in Cloud Foundry. And by the end of the six weeks, it's expected that you are now a Cloud Foundry contributor and know enough about a space or two to be able to contribute. And typically then, it's someone who works at a company that's going to use Cloud Foundry. They go back to their company and take that knowledge with them and help spread it, pair with people in their company. So it's kind of a new model, hoping to bring more companies and organizations into this open source development model. It also has its challenges, like distributed work environments. And then we also added certification, which is a new, it's not, certification isn't new, but it's kind of new in terms of open source software. So we have these large companies that want to use Cloud Foundry, and they want to know that the version of Cloud Foundry that they're using is the Cloud Foundry, and if they switched providers or they downloaded the open source one, that it would be the same thing. And so we added certification, and a bunch of our members were at a launch in December and are now offering Cloud Foundry certified Cloud Foundry as part of their products. If you get Swisscom, it's Swisscom Certified Cloud Foundry. Here I talk a little bit about what certification means. You have to certify the core, you have to certify what an extension is. So people developing APIs and you download those APIs, are they also certified? Do they run against the certified version? And then I wanted to end on I think there's 3 primary ways you can try out Cloud Foundry. So how many people, before I tell the 3 ways, I'm curious. So if all of you are here to learn about Cloud Foundry, with the little that I managed to explain, if you were going to walk out the door and go try to use it, what's the first thing you would do?
GitHub. Look for Cloud Foundry.
You would look for Cloud Foundry on GitHub? You would you install Cloud Foundry itself? What would you do?
I would install Python.
You would install Python? Cool. Write your own app? Anybody else?
Yeah, I would probably go to the demo site you talked about.
And create a demo account? Cool.
Get my CF push on.
Anybody else? How many people would go try to install Cloud? Oh, yeah. So do another a trial account. How many people would go try to install it themselves first?
You can install the whole server.
And install all of Cloud Foundry? Okay, about maybe a third. How many people would go sign up for a trial account? Most people, half people. How many people would, even if they're signing up for a trial account, go to GitHub or the docs and read about Cloud Foundry there? Okay, awesome. Thank you. I'm doing my market research off you guys. So the 3 ways to try it out are to sign up for a trial account. So we have a number of providers, probably almost 2 handfuls of providers, SAP, Swisscom, CenturyLink, Bluemix, Pivotal, and a number of them have trial accounts. So that's one way to try it out. That's how I started. It's really easy.
Can I throw in a comment there? You asked how many you're going to install, how many you're going to do.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you caught this, but I feel like I need to do both. Because if I go do a trial, well, now I want to run it. Well, if it's just too painful to install it, to manage it, I want to know that before I invest more time. So I'm going to do both those concurrently because both sides of that are important.
That's a really good input. And I asked before, but just show me again, how many people would eventually, if you used it, install it in-house? Now that you know what it is, too. Yeah, cool. About 80% of you. My very rough guesstimate. You had a question?
I did, so I guess I'm still a little confused, because I feel like, so you're saying that I could run Cloud Foundry on top of AWS or on top of OpenStack. AWS is like infrastructure provided by Amazon. So how would I deploy, like I'm still not picturing, like do I install Cloud, then would I have to install Cloud Foundry on an AWS instance?
Yes.
I would, so I would have to do that first, and then I could deploy my apps.
Yes, or you could go to CenturyLink or Pivotal, and they've already done all that for you. You sign in for an account, and then on your command line interface, you say, link me to this Pivotal or CenturyLink or Bluemix instance, and then you can just do your CF push from your machine.
Okay.
And they all have some sort of trial. They all obviously have a business model off that. So if you do run your app that way, it's really easy, and then you'll pay them a monthly fee of some sort. Yeah.
Because I don't know if I want to be, like for my individual site, I don't know if I want to be managing Cloud Foundry server.
I would find that unlikely, but if you're a business, you might, because you want to know exactly how it all works and have it on your own hardware or whatever. Yeah. So that's one option. Go sign up for the trial account. The second one is download it, play with it, contribute it. So a number of you said you would maybe do both, but that's one way. And then the third way that I had, and they're no longer actively working on Lattice, but Lattice had a lot of the technologies that Cloud Foundry did, but it was kind of a standalone install on your laptop version. So it's still totally functional, and it's kind of a good way if you're on your laptop this weekend here at the conference, you can download Lattice and play with it and kind of get a feel for Cloud Foundry in a smaller package without having to install Cloud Foundry and all its dependencies and all that.
Is this all in docs?
All in the docs? Yeah. And the other way you can do is come to the Cloud Foundry Summit. It's like 2,000 people that are all Cloud Foundry fans. It's awesome. Maybe not as awesome as scale, but pretty awesome. So you can also come there. And they're around the world if you're not based here. We have 3 of them, one in Asia, one in Europe, one in the US. So any other questions that I can help anybody with, or I can follow up with afterwards?
Can we get a copy of your slide deck?
Yes, they will be wherever Scale posts them, or also on my SlideShare account. Any other questions? And yeah.
Does Cloud Foundry have a database system built in, or do you support certain database systems?
For the apps, there are a number of apps that are already built in as services. So you can use MySQL, you can use that Spark database, you can use Redis, Postgres, you can use all the big ones are there. And you can add your own if for some reason you wanted to. Yeah.
How would you compare the learning curve from total new to actually getting some useful work out of it compared to OpenStack?
So if you're an app developer and you're willing to use one of the services that's out there, it's a really small learning curve. So I'm not an active app developer anymore, like I play every once in a while. And I mean, I literally figured it out. I asked a few questions on the mailing list and got myself up with my first demo app within an hour. I mean, it was like really quick. If you're installing it yourself in-house, then you're going to need to train some people to be Cloud Foundry experts. There's a number of consultancy companies that help out with that. So I think CenturyLink have consultants that help with the...
I don't believe so.
Okay, so Pivotal, the big companies do like Pivotal. Okay, the big companies do like Pivotal and IBM, and also there's a bunch of smaller ones like Altoros and ECS and Cloud Credo, and there's a number of smaller companies that help. And I was talking to the ECS guys, and they're like, when do you tell a client, okay, you now know enough, like you can do it on your own? So we're looking at providing training, we have training, and we're looking at certifying individuals as Cloud Foundry experts, and we're kind of trying to define like how many Cloud Foundry experts does a company need to feel like they're sufficient. I'd say it's measured in months probably if you're going to install it yourself and use it in-house. Yeah. Yeah, so like all the databases, there's a number of services built into it. Is that what you're asking? Yeah, there's been talk about that. There's nothing as part of the core Cloud Foundry right now that's like like an app store type thing that doesn't exist yet. All of the providers do add usually, so they have Cloud Foundry and then they have their own GUIs and their own tools around it. So if you're looking to use it, you should evaluate Bluemix versus Pivotal versus CenturyLink. You should take a look at them. But we've talked about it because it would also be nice if there was an app store where individuals could put their apps and it didn't matter what Cloud Foundry they ran on, but some place to highlight them.
So
Yeah.
I'm like in my software as a service stack, I have some software that you don't have a package for yet, or that Cloud Foundry doesn't manage yet. Is there a way I can add it to the Cloud Foundry?
You can add your own languages, you can add your own databases, you can add your own services, yeah. If we have Cobalt, we must have a lot of them, but you can add your own. Any other questions? Anything you were hoping to get from this presentation that you haven't yet? Okay, well, I'm around for the rest of the event.